Let's reinforce and elaborate on some of the concepts from Chapter 1. First, let's start with the definition of consumer behavior. It reflects the totality of consumers' decisions with respect to the acquisition, consumption, and disposition of goods, services, activities, experiences, people, and ideas by human decision-making units. Let's break this down a little bit more. So first, let's take a consumer who's thinking about getting a new smartphone. She's noticed that it's slowed down. She might be suffering with some limitations in terms of space. The first decision, whether or not to get one. And then if so, which one to obtain. Maybe she's historically been an iPhone user but is considering a new Samsung model. But then if she decides to go with the iPhone, should she get the new version? Should she get an older one? So whether or not to get a refurbished model or the brand new one. Where should she obtain it? From the Apple Store, from an online platform? And if she obtains it in person, would she pay with cash or credit card? So we can see that a lot of decisions go into one seemingly simple decision. And then further, when people think about consumer behavior in marketing, they often mistake the focus on acquisition, but there's also a lot more that goes into consumption. So the actual process of using a product. This is important because, for example, products sold in different sizes of packages lead to different usage rates. And then getting rid of product is also an important part of consumer behavior. And there are some industries where the waste stream can represent a platform for a totally different industry. So the website Gazelle.com and Swappa.com, when consumers decide to get rid of their old cell phones, they can sell these to these websites who then turn around, refurbish them, and sell them to other consumers. And then people also often think about acquiring tangible, concrete products, but there are many other things that people can consume, such as services like haircuts or exercise classes, activities such as participating in clubs like the Boy Scouts of America. People are often marketed, so celebrities or politicians will seek people's support. So for example, in the context of a political advertising, what politicians want is a vote or support for a particular policy. That's a form of, when people vote, that's a form of them expressing their consumer behavior. And then general ideas, so things like eco-friendliness or willingness to obtain a vaccine. There are also a number of different roles that can be adopted in the process of making decisions. Sometimes we play all of these roles. So we are the information gatherer, influencer, decider, purchaser, and user. However, there are situations such as when making household purchases where, for example, a teen might be an influencer and the information gatherer, acquiring information about where a family could go on vacation. And an adult mother or father might be the person who makes the decision and the actual purchase. This is, of course, important from a marketing perspective because you need to know who to target with particular information. If you find out that teens are the influencers, you're going to want to disseminate information to them that will stoke interest to get them excited about a particular location for vacation. Whereas if you know that an adult is making the actual purchase, then that's the person you're going to want to give information about where they can actually go to secure that purchase, to actually conduct that transaction. And then we examine consumer behavior dynamically over time. We can focus on one specific decision, but we all know from our own experience that whether or not you are happy with a particular decision influences what you do subsequently. So if you go to a restaurant and you have poor service, the likelihood that you return is very low. Whereas if you go and you really like it, you'll come back. And maybe something that you've learned from other marketing classes or exposure to business is that it is much less costly to keep a satisfied customer than it is to obtain a new customer. So figuring out how to reinforce and look at the customer lifetime value of people over time is an important part of consumer behavior. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that consumer behavior and marketing are closely aligned and there's a lot of overlap. But there is a subtle difference. So let's look at our marketing definition here. It's the activity, set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for a number of individuals. What I really want to zero in on here is the value, creating value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. So marketing, when we think about marketing and marketing strategy, we are implicitly adopting the perspective of the firm or the organization or the entity that is being marketed. Whereas consumer behavior is implicitly consumer-centric. So what this means is you're understanding the behavior from the perspective of the consumer. There might be some questions asked by consumer behavior researchers that are not of value to marketers. For example, researching the types of art that consumers make out of old packages, how they create things that provide meaning for them but are not necessarily financially viable. That's an important consumer behavior question. Marketers wouldn't necessarily care. In general, though, oftentimes understanding how consumers navigate their environment is helpful for marketers as they do try to create value for consumers to get them coming back and purchasing or engaging in the services that they're offering. So they're two sides of the same coin, but they are not the same. Now I want to give a preview of what we're going to cover in this course. So we see this model of consumer behavior here, and I want to start here in the middle, the psychological core. This represents what is going on in our minds as we interact with the environment. So when we perceive advertisements, when we're exposed to new products, when we are learning about new platforms or social media channels where we can interact with brands and companies, this is all going on under the hood. Then externally, we have the consumer's culture. These are forces on the outside that can influence what goes on here under the hood. So things like what other people do or say with regards to the use of other products, so social influences. The notion of consumer diversity. This is the idea that where we live in terms of the region and the country, what is our social class, what is our age and gender. These aspects all shape what happens in terms of how we think and make consumer decisions. Then our household role, as I mentioned before, whether or not we're younger or older, whether we have the resources to make certain decisions, that is going to shape what happens in the psychological core. And then psychographics, maybe you've heard these terms. Things like our values, our personality, and general lifestyles also shape how we interface with the consumer environment. So we've got these internal and external factors that come to bear when we make decisions, consumption decisions, or engage in consumer behavior. So we can think about these as sort of macro factors that are relevant to micro level decisions. And there's been a lot of research looking at how consumers make decisions. So first there's the step of problem recognition. There's some type of need. Maybe your car breaks down. Maybe your smartphone breaks. Then judgment and decision making, the options that you consider, which one you finally select, and then post-decision processes, how you evaluate the decision that you made. Were you satisfied or not? Then finally, we've got consumer behavior outcomes and issues. And these are related to how these micro decisions that we make here, the process of decision making, each of these individual level decisions add up and influence the world around us. So imagine a consumer who eats a donut once a day. In that individual moment, eating a donut isn't necessarily a problem. But if we look at the macro level, eating a donut a day for years may have consequences for that individual consumer. And then that has societal consequences for use of healthcare services. Similarly, we can think about use of plastic. Maybe using products in plastic packaging once a week isn't a big deal, but then if you look at this over time, how things accumulate, this has societal consequences. So this model of consumer behavior reflects both micro and macro level influences. Let's quickly take an imaginary consumer named Tara. How might these domains relate to Tara's decision to purchase a car? So for example, we can think about before the decision, she makes the decision, she's been exposed to a great deal of advertising for different brands and different models. So she may have different attitudes about certain types of brands. Maybe she favors Toyota because she's seen consumer reports that suggest that it's very economical, the resale value was great. Then maybe other friends of hers have purchased Toyotas, maybe her or her family, maybe her mother or father has a Toyota Tacoma. Maybe she's been exposed to a number of people in her neighborhood who drive Toyota Tacomas. Maybe trucks are considered a status symbol in the particular socioeconomic status group that she belongs to, or the particular region in the country that she lives in. So when she is actually faced with the actual decision of making a purchase, that might be one of the options that comes to her mind, her consideration set. But she might also explore some other options of other brands of trucks, just to feel like she's done her due diligence and is making an informed decision. Because trucks or cars are high involvement purchases. We're going to cover these different types of purchases that will involve more or less effort on the part of the decision maker. Then after she makes the choice, she'll think about whether or not she was happy with her purchase. And then her individual choice, there are many other Taras who are also considering whether or not to purchase, say, gasoline or hybrid or electric cars. That's going to add up and have consequences societally for the level of, say, pollution. Finally, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about consumer behavior research methods, or how consumer behavior researchers answer some of the questions we've raised above. And I want to do this for a few reasons. As we go throughout the semester, as you read through the textbook, you might wonder, well, how was some of this information gathered? How were some of these insights created? Also, as you read through popular press news sites, you might wonder, when you read these articles, well, what is this based on? And so understanding consumer behavior research methods can make you a little bit more research and data literate. In addition, in your future roles, whether you're marketers or you are operating in a business context in any capacity, being data literate and research literate is critical, because it will help you assess the validity of the information that was obtained, and it will also help you, if you need to gather research or data yourself, help you understand which methods are better suited to particular aims. So first, at a very high level, we've got two basic types of data. Primary data, this is information that you as the researcher, or the researcher specifically, gathers to answer a particular question. And then we've got secondary data. This is information that was gathered previously to answer another question that might help someone else answer a pressing question. So let's talk about primary and secondary data in a little bit more detail, starting with secondary. It can be either qualitative, meaning textual, or the types of responses to open-ended questions that people might give in customer satisfaction surveys, or quantitative, the types of responses in a customer satisfaction survey that would be measured on a scale from 1 to 7. Typically, secondary research is cheaper or sometimes free relative to primary research because it is internal to the company, for instance. Maybe a product developer wants to look back at focus group responses to a product that was developed previously in order to gain insights that would help them moving forward with this new product. Or there are companies whose primary purpose is to gather and aggregate information that companies can buy. So maybe we have an entrepreneur who's thinking about entering a industry that he or she doesn't know a lot about. You can buy existing data from other companies that look at different potential segments in a market, forecast industry trends that will be faster and help you answer these questions about who might be good target segments than doing that research yourself. So the time frame is typically shorter. It's a great place to start, as we have here outlined, but sometimes the information that you can obtain via secondary research, it's either outdated. Think about research conducted on social media use 5 years ago. It's not relevant to social media use today, right? Or the types of questions that were asked in, say, a focus group or questionnaire, they're not detailed enough perhaps for specific purposes presently. So maybe someone is an entrepreneur is thinking about launching a new product, and primary research or previous research suggests that consumers have certain preferences about features, but doesn't give insight into, say, the amount of money they'd be willing to spend. So in the case that you can't get the answers from the secondary research that you already have, you then conduct primary research. So starting here with surveys, this is quantitative in nature. Customer satisfaction surveys are a great example where after a purchase, people may be surveyed about how likely they would be to recommend a particular product to a friend. And the cost of these surveys can be really shoestring, so very simple. You can recycle old surveys in terms of the questions you've used and send those out to participants, and you can ask people to contribute on a voluntary basis, or you can pay people a lot of money to contribute. So here it varies widely depending on the scope and the aims of the survey. It's great for answering very specific questions. So if you know what you want to measure, so for instance, maybe you want to ask current consumers if they would be interested in a restaurant offering a brunch menu. You can ask current consumers, you have the database, send them out information about what you're considering offering and say, to what extent are you interested in this brunch menu? To what extent would you be interested in avocado toast on our menu, for instance? Now, if you don't exactly know what you want to ask, you have a sense, you have a general sense, but you need more qualitative, more open-ended measures, then focus groups can be great. So maybe you have a prototype of a new product. You want to understand how consumers are responding to it, but you don't know specifically the dimensions about which to ask them. So you can give them this new product, say this new food item that you're thinking about putting on the menu, have people try it, and then you sit around and you discuss it. So it's good for exploring because you can probe a little bit more, you can get insights that maybe you hadn't considered that you would have to outline explicitly with a focus group. Interviews are similar to focus groups in that you can obtain qualitative information, but they're conducted one-on-one and are better for topics that are a little bit more sensitive or that suffer from social desirability concerns. So if you're asking someone about their drinking behavior or health-related behavior that you're worried if you ask in a group context, people might not give their honest opinions, then an interview can be better for obtaining more valid responses. Then we've got experiments and field trials, which are primarily quantitative because you're testing whether or not a change in one or two or a very limited set of particular variables lead to some kind of outcome. So for example, maybe we want to test whether one advertisement is more effective in stimulating demand than another advertisement. This could be done, maybe you've heard of A/B testing. We can do this online. We can do this by putting one ad in one market and putting another ad in a similar market and seeing which leads to better sales. This is also used in academic research. So a lot of the research that you'll see published in, for example, the Journal of Consumer Research, this academic journal, is experimentally based. And this is because you can rigorously control for other outside potential influences on the outcome of interest, so you can make strong causal statements. You'll learn much more about all of this in your marketing research class that you may or may not be currently taking. So this is just intended to give you a general flavor of consumer behavior research methods. And finally, I want to end with observation. This is usually qualitative and is done when you suspect that if you ask people to give you information about their behavior, that they either will not because it's a socially sensitive question, or that they cannot because they don't have enough insight into their own behavior. This actually happens a lot of the time. Think about your own behavior. The last time you bought a candy bar or you made an impulse purchase, if someone asked you why you did something, you might be able to come up with an explanation an after the fact explanation, but does it really reflect the reality? Are you just giving this to the researcher because you were asked for an explanation, or is it what actually drove what you did? So sometimes researchers will hide out and watch what people do. For example, when they're on the yogurt aisle, do they pick up 3 different yogurts and actually look at the nutritional information, and then decide which one to put in their basket? If that was you as a consumer as you exited the store and a researcher asked you, how did you make the decision about your yogurt? You might not remember what you were doing in that aisle. So in order to get really granular and find out what happens, there are a number of different observational approaches that researchers use to gain insight to these questions. So like I mentioned, I just wanted to provide a higher level overview of some of these consumer behavior research methods so that you can understand as we work through this course how these insights that we'll discuss were obtained, and then how you too, when you have a research question, can go about answering it in the most valid way possible.